People commonly ask me why I started going to Chiapas and why I continue to go. Hopefully this talk will answer those questions. If I can figure out how to advance. There we go. To give you context and bearings, Chiapas is the southernmost state in Mexico. The villages of the highlands are circled in red, so it's kind of the midpoint in the state. There are several reasons why I stay in Chiapas, but to begin with, it all came down to Lou. Lou Casagrande was the senior vice president of the Science Museum in Minnesota, and he hired me in 1994 to be the first full-time collection manager or collections manager that the museum had. And a collections manager is similar to a registrar in an art museum, responsible for the documentation of a collection. Lou also had been collecting in Chiapas since 1977. He went down there at that time to collect a Maya house and its contents to put on exhibit in the Science Museum. So they built a house at the museum, and all of the contents came from a house in Naubenchauk, which is part of Zinacantan. So we had a pretty large collection at the Science Museum. There was also a endowed internship, the Cordry internship in Mexican folk art. And the first project I did was going down to Mexico City to set up the project for the intern. Lou thought this would be a grand idea, and so sent me down there. That is where I met Ruth Lechuga, lovely woman. And I was there to set up this internship for the Cordry intern to catalog her mask collection and do some interviews with her for the record. She had been collecting in Mexico for a very long time and was one of the experts in Mexican folk art. She was rather appalled that the museum had sent someone who didn't know a lick of Spanish to set up this project with the intern. But she warmed me by the end of the time I spent with her, and she was just such a lovely, warm woman. And she introduced me to Marta Turok, who is also an expert in Chiapas. And that started my journey. They were both in Mexico City. And for years, until Ruth passed away, every time I went, I would stop there and see her and talk about collections. And then there's Chip, Walter F. Morris Jr., who is a MacArthur Fellow and a research associate at the Science Museum. Between the three of them, I was inundated with information about Mexican folk art and the textiles of Chiapas. I did an exhibit at the Science Museum. What was the title? Chiapas Continuity and Change in 1996 in March. And at the exhibit, we brought a weaver from Tenajapa to recreate a piece that we had a fragment in the collection. And so she came with Pedro Mesa, and who was the head of the weaving cooperative there. And he graphed out the textile, and she wove in the exhibit for 8 hours a day for the time that she was there. And she loved it. More about Chip. I mean, the first time I went to Chiapas, it was to meet with Chip. I remember it was September, I think it was 1996. And I spent a week sitting in the garden at Navalome, the museum there, waiting for Chip because he was too busy to talk to me. I think in a week, I did amazing things, but in that week, I think I spent, maybe half an hour talking to him. I started collecting in Zinacantan because I was really curious. And this is, and when I was at the museum, I laid out all of the things from the first things I collected, which were older, to what was going on when I left the museum. But I wanted to know how they went from the textile and the shawl in the upper left-hand corner, which was mostly white with some red stripes. And then down below was another version of a woolen version of the textile with just a small border, and then the little strings that were the ties. And then all of a sudden flowers started to appear at the holes where the ties were. And all of a sudden they just kept getting bigger and bigger. So the bottom right-hand corner, you see the size that they were when this image was taken. So these are men's tunics, and Chip and I talked about what this change was, and we decided that it was fashion, that it was materials were available that people weren't able to get before. And so you see the older version in 1975 with just a tiny little caterpillar at the bottom, and the V-strips along the side. By 1980, that strip along the caterpillar along the bottom was bigger, and the sides were moving closer to the middle. And it got more so and more so. And as time went by, the designs got more elaborate. And for a while, the colors got very much darker until 2001. They were, the textiles were almost black. I mean, they were so dark. And the embroidery was also very dark. The one on the bottom left, you can't see it in this image, and I wish you could, is mostly metallic thread. That was kind of the beginning of and I know that this was, I think this was one of the pieces that the gentleman who owned this didn't like it because the strap on his bag was rubbing the threads, and so it didn't look very nice, and so he wanted a new one. So his wife wove him a new piece, and I purchased the old one because it was an interesting design as well as this metallic thread. And the last piece, this is a shawl, but this was the colors from probably 5 or 6 years ago. So that was, it was looking at Chip and I were looking at when I finally convinced him to go to Zinacantan, because he wasn't terribly interested because they did embroidery and he was interested in brocade, which is a supplementary weft technique where the design is created at the same time as the base fabric. And when I finally convinced him, he went and he went, wow, this is really interesting. Let's keep going back. And so we went back for several years. We went for San Sebastian in the festival in January, and San Lorenzo, the festival in August. And this is, I can't remember what year this is, but this is 2 women who wanted their picture taken outside of the church. So you can see the flowers. The people in Zinacantan grow flowers. And so a lot of the motifs are flower motifs. And you can see the difference. Now this is a few years ago because they started doing scalloped edges instead of a straight edge, which is kind of interesting. Two of the things that we did to document this is one year we decided to see if we could get people to pose in their garments. And it was pre-digital cameras. So we were using disposable cameras that the pictures were taken, and we had a taxi with one of Chip's kids that would go back and forth into town to have the Photoshop develop them. And so we could get them back to the people at the same day so they didn't have to wait. We promised them that they would get a copy of the image. And so these are some of the pictures we took that year. And then the rest of the time we were just taking pictures as we saw people walk by. We posted ourselves at a table at one of the beer tents and just surreptitiously took pictures of people as they were walking by. Some of these pictures were taken when you could have, open cameras, but some of them were not. I'm not sure which year this is, but couple of lovely shawls there. And then there are just some different shots. There's one of what the looms look like and how they were set up outside of. And it was interesting because this often didn't happen before the festivals. You wouldn't see, people would be weaving not out in the open because they didn't want people to see what they were going to be wearing at the festival, or at least that's what we presumed. The other thing we tried to do was document how people were, the process in which people were making things. And we had chosen fashion leaders, or they presented themselves to us watching the textiles and what was happening and the colors they were weaving and the designs they were weaving. And one of the women was in a village called Naubenchauk. And I collected a number of textiles from she and her neighbor who would always come over when we were there purchasing. So we came across her doing a design. And as you can see, this is freehand. This is in her head, and she's just drawing this design on the textile so she can embroider it afterwards. And she showed us the finished piece that was just drawn. At that point, I couldn't afford the large tunic, but we had her do a child's tunic. The tunic is not very big. And I had her draw the design on all of it, but only embroider half of it. She, of course, thought I was crazy. But it's interesting because it again gives you the process of this is the drawn design, and here's the embroidery on top of it. And these are some of the images, I think, from the last year or the year before, 2019, sorry. Oh, that's right, COVID, right. Of the market, and the colors were very muted that year. There were a lot of pastels and beige and gray that I'd never seen before. What was interesting about the picture on the bottom right is the sunflower design is one of the first designs I saw when I was there in 1996. And the fact that they were bringing the sunflowers back pleased me. So just more, it gives you an idea. This is how they sell the thread in the market. So you just, and there's quite an array now. For a while, that would be the chosen colors. And so you would get a different palette. And now it's pretty much anything that you want. And so now these are the weavers markets. These aren't this isn't a craft market. This market is part of the Sunday market in Zinacantan. And I think a couple of these are in Nawanchuk or Nachik, but they're specifically for women to go get their thread, get a blouse if they don't choose to do their own, or they can get a blouse that has a design on it that they can embroider. And so it's a mix of finished products and partially finished products. You can get skirts with designs on them, and you can get skirts that are embroidered. And it just depends on what you want to do. But it's a very interesting place to go to, and it's a good place to see the change in the color. And at one point, and I wish I had picked one up, because I like to go and see which blankets that the ladies there are gravitating toward, and what they're talking about and what they're picking up and what they're pointing to. At one point, there were embroidery sheets, like the old embroidery books. And they sell them by the page, and people would pick the ones that they were interested. They'd take pieces of it and put it on a shawl or their skirt. It was very interesting, and I never did pick one up, but interesting. One of the advantages of going down there so many times over so many years is I've met a lot of people. And so this is Maria and her two daughters who are from Chamula, and they sold things in the garden at the Museum of Nabalom. And I met her, and every time I bring a tour, because I brought tours from the people of the Science Museum for 14 years. And we would always make sure that we saw Maria, and that, she just was a hugger. And so it was very nice to see her and talk to her. And I can't remember their names, but they had the beer tent in Zinacantan, and they were the people who set up our photo area when we were doing photos, because inside the beer tent was that is private, and so you couldn't take pictures in the public area, but you could in the private area, and so that's what we did. The other advantage is not only Maya friends, but Mexican friends and expat friends and friends that I brought from Minnesota. So the woman in the far left, you will hear about when we talk about what's going on now, because Elena is working on our archive project in Mexico right now. And Jack, to the right, is her father, and he is a photographer, and he was the tour guide that we had when I was giving tours. And this is the whole family. The other advantage is having these interesting conversations, and it always was Chip and Pedro Mesa, who is the head of Snaholaville Weaving Cooperative, and they had been working together I don't know, since 76, I think. I'd have to ask Pedro that. I didn't. So it was always an interesting discussion over the years. And Pedro was the person who came to Minnesota and brought a weaver. And I always spent time with his mother and friends. So again, different groups of people. This is Ruth with Fidencia, who is in, oh golly, my brain just went. San Andrés, sorry. And she does natural dyes. And my friend Ruth from Minnesota did natural dyes in the Science Museum in the Anthropology Hall. That was one of her ideas and passions. And it was interesting that every time I brought somebody there, you know, it was always, oh, I would like to do such and such in the Anthropology Hall. Can we go see somebody who does spraying bags? Or, you know, I want to know about natural dyes, or I want to know about carving or spinning, and so we would make a point each time to make sure that people could visit the folks that they wanted to. And of course, the other are the places. This is La Casa Morada, where I stayed for a while. This is the purple house, I guess is what you call it. This is the Garden of Navalome, the upper right-hand corner. And below is a house in Naubenschauck. And the reason I took this picture is the images that are painted on the tops. Those are designs from the weaving. And so more pictures of, this is San Cristóbal. So there's places. The middle is Matthew comes with me, even though he has nothing to do with Mexico. But the last time I brought him, he went and had cocktails with us at the place that Paraiso, where you get the best margaritas in San Cristóbal. And that's their patio next to it. And I think the last thing in this section is I saw something this last trip in January that I was very surprised by. And I'm sorry that this color isn't very good, but this is Tenajapa, and I think the picture on the left is I think that was at Snaholabil. But the picture on the right is from the Weaving Cooperative in Tenajapa. And you can see everything around it is either naturally dyed wool, so it's the browns, or this red. I had never, in all the time that I've been there, seen colors like this, seen a dyed base with a color other than red or brown. And so if you want to see the real color afterwards, it's on the table because I have it on the exhibit. So the other part of this talk, hopefully that gave you an idea of why I'm there and why I got there and why I'm still there. In 2018, Lou asked me to, would I be willing to lead a project to put together this archive, this digital archive? And he just thought that we would collect all of these things and have it in one all-encompassing database, and that this would all be great. Well, it hasn't worked out that way, but But first, I want to thank Elena, the Mexican project lead, and most importantly, my friend, because all of this work on this project, on this new project, would be nothing without her. She's putting so much work. So the mission is twofold now. The project has kind of morphed. We realized that the all-encompassing archive was not going to work. So the mission is twofold: to create a virtual archive of the things that we can, and use the process and the product to train a new generation of individuals there in documentation and care. We're finding partners to help in that. Let's see, come on, there we go. And after speaking with multiple people in art, textile, and museum communities in Mexico, Elena developed a formal prospectus to describe the project to people who might be interested. And we've been writing a similar document to present to funders. Additionally, Elena and I investigated steps necessary to gain nonprofit status in Mexico and the United States. And I think now we're going with the just nonprofit status in the United States, or in Mexico, and to find a fiscal sponsor in the US. And there are a couple of options in that. So these are the types of materials that we're considering. You know, obviously artifacts, textiles, but field notes, photographs, exhibit label copy, because it's interesting how much information those contain that might not be anywhere else. Art, video, manuscripts, interviews, and graphical representations. Here are some of the things, examples of the rich culture that we're trying to document. And here are some others. At first, the project was developed for researchers, is now become more focused on community and communities. What information is important and what stories are important to both groups. An example is the private collection of Sergio Castro and why his collection exists. He has a private collection that was given him by people who he helped in villages. He is a water project engineer, but who has worked with Maya people who've been burned with fires. And in gratitude, he has this collection, and it's an amazing collection. But what information will be lost if the oral history isn't gathered? That's another piece that we, all of this information adds richness and levels to the object's history. So it's not just a textile, it's the story behind it. And the benefits for us and others, there's a structure in place for future work. We form strong collaborations, provide an information source that can be added to or changed, and have digital access to historic collections. So currently we have several partners. One of them is Museo Navalom, Snahobil, the Weaving Cooperative, Science Museum of Minnesota, that kind of started me on this journey. CIPRI, or the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Nonprofit. The Chiapas Photography Project, which has been going on for, ooh, golly, at least 25, 30 years, and some private collections. Elena has developed formal documents for partners defining what they expect from our project and what we expect in return. That could be expertise, funding, or any other need that we supply them. What expertise can we supply to either start projects or continue ones that are already started? And what expertise do our partners possess that can help us further our end of the project? And Elena is very good at finding new partners and identifying issues that need to be addressed. So here is our partner, Snahoalabil. Here are some of the weavers that are part of that organization. That has been going on since 1979 or 80. So it's a long time weaving cooperative. And this is the patio at Navalome and some of the collections, I believe most of which those blouses I collected, surprisingly. Our newest collaboration is with CIPRI, the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative. And this came out of a collaboration with Elena's work with the Chiapas Photography Project. An important part of this initiative is for creators of material culture to understand what rights they have in terms of intellectual property. That's a big thing in Mexico as it is in other places. And our project has provided some funding for the printing of this information in Tzotzil and Tzeltal, the two major languages that of the people that we deal with. And it's being distributed to local community organizations, as well as meeting with them to talk about the issues. Another collaboration is with the Chiapas Photography Project that until recently was run by a longtime friend of mine, is now run by Elena. And they've been producing these little books they're called libritos, and it's text and images from their photographers. And there's a wide range of topics. There's one at the end of the table, I think on Tenajapa. But we're trying to put together this so that put one together to promote and obtain funding for this project. And we are working on a website that's going slowly, but I expect Elena is waiting for me to get some of my pieces done. And this is what it'll include, to talk about our mission and probably have the prospectus on there so people can read it. We've been gathering blog posts, and I think some of those are ready to go. But the rest of it is, a database, links to other museums and other databases, and a guide for groups that want to use the database that we've chosen to do data entry in English, Spanish, or Tzotzil. So it'll be, it will have the ability of being multilingual. And this is one of the pieces that to be able to show multiple images, so you can see the entire artifact, but you can also see details. And the people that are going to be using it are going to decide what elements do we need. And the final phase of the project includes internships and training in documentation, curation, and conservation for Indigenous and local students. Although training is in the final phase, some of it is being planned sooner because of need or request. And we're still working on that with both Snahoalabil and with Museo Navalome. But we've also got requests for training on preservation and care in tropical climates, especially dealing with pest control, because that's a big issue there. And humidity and reduction, because it is very humid there all the time, even when it's cold. Obtaining funding and moving a project forward isn't easy or quick. Again, when Lou asked me to develop this project in 2018, he had this grand view of the all-encompassing wonder site of all things Highland Maya. And if you ever met Lou, that you know that he had a grand view of what could happen, and you know, often he could make it happen. But that we've had to shift that just because of the impossibility of getting everybody to agree on one thing. We're just shifting to links instead of making everybody put information in the same database. And it's basically talking to our partners and the communities and their needs and desires, because it's not my story, it's not Chip's story, it's not Lou's story, it's not Pedro's story. It's all those stories. It's not just the what it is and how it was constructed, but why. Why was it made and why was it collected? And these are some of the past project collaborators, both in the US and Mexico. So much has been imposed upon and taken away from the Maya and other indigenous groups in Chiapas. Slowly, the Chiapas Maya Project is moving to close and considered collaborations with partners. Perhaps we have a chance now of a conduit for sharing expertise, both within the community and outside of it. This is what I can contribute. That is what Elena can contribute. We will do so to provide needed resources so partners can document and preserve their material culture and intangible heritage. We're in the danger of losing the context, which adds critical value to the objects and documents. We've already lost two of the major people involved in the project, Chip in 2018 and Lou last year. We're worried that collections and information are dispersed and will be more dispersed, and that we hope our project will serve as a gathering place. Thank you. And right now, we have minimal funding, so I'm hoping that soon we will have this fiscal sponsor so that it will be a nonprofit donation as opposed to handing me cash, which is what it's been in the past. So, thanks. Do you guys have any questions that are here? I'm sorry. Oh, it's still bad. I know some weaving terms, but I don't hear it enough. And of course, being here, it's, you know, I leave there and it's all gone. And then I go back and it's, what? So it's been complicated, and that's not my best skill. And Elena is Wonder Woman. She's young and energetic and has been, because she went with us when we were doing tours for the Science Museum, when, you know, I think she started going with us when she was 9. I think that's when I first met her. And so was the tour guide, yeah. And so this, you know, I feel like I'm part of their family because of just this wonderful connection that we've had for a long time. Sure.
Are the younger people in the community as enthusiastic about the craft as the?
Depends on the community. I think that there's a concerted effort to get young people more involved. And I think that one of the things that, because they might not be interested in weaving, but they might be interested in something else. I know the photography project, that was often young. That started out being all young kids, basically, that were involved in that. And I think that, you know, you have to get people with their interest. You know, some people are very interested in, oh, how can I save this? Or, you know, how can I keep this story going? And I think that's one of the things that we can do as part of this. To you know, it's like the ship.
Yes.
You know, when they were building the shallop, some kids didn't want to be involved in that, but they were really keen on doing media or doing, you know, other things. And so there's this group, there's this information that we have from that project that wouldn't have been there if we hadn't have said, oh yeah, you know, here, you know, work with Patty, that would be great. And to have somebody that can lead that way.
I just know so many cultures worry about losing their traditional designs and skills.
Mhm.
I heard a story about some of the basket makers in Maine, how there was this one technique that this one woman left who knew how to do, and all of a sudden, the younger women said, "We need to learn this."
Right. Well, I know one of the pieces, the Science Museum just got a grant from Institute for Museum and Library Services for their Chiapas collection. Yay, at last. And they're going to be coming to San Cristóbal next year, I hope in January or February. I haven't heard yet. But because there are things at the Science Museum that, one of them being audio recordings of weavers talking about what they were doing. And unfortunately, even then, there was what I understood is there was a language disconnect, that there wasn't anybody to kind of, you know, translate. So I'm hoping that that those will end up in a Indigenous language archive, and that there will be people that can go back and listen to them and do the transcripts. I know there are some, but there were some interviews that they didn't do transcripts. That was a project that Pedro was involved in, Pedro and Chip.
I'm wondering if you have a sense of why those drastic color changes from those really bright colors and then the really dark. Do you think it had anything to do what was going on? Good, so far out with society, or
Could do, I'm not sure. Sometimes it was availability, sometimes it was, I want something different, but it did get very dark. And in some cases, the embroidery disappeared from a lot of, and I never quite teased that out. And of course, you know, Chip's gone, so I'm not sure how to, but we'll find a way to, and I think having all this stuff together, all these documents together, that it will help somebody, hopefully from Zinacantan, who says, oh, yes, it you know, this is what was happening here, but that they're able to be the discussion, instead of having an anthropologist from, you know, Timbuktu come and say, well, I think it's this. And it's interesting because because of this focus on color, I read a lot about color and the way people view color and the way different cultures view color. There are some very interesting books about the topic. And when you start reading about it, you go, oh, that's the, maybe this is why. But that's a question I cannot answer.
Even the sunflowers were dark. Not like sunflowers.
Yeah, well, but on some of the older pieces, they are bright. I mean, the sunflowers were bright. It was just, that was, particularly somber color background choice. And I don't know if it was that they were falling into the, because Snahalabila at least used to do a lot of weaving for Europe, for people in Europe, and they would send thread and have the women weave in those colors. So, that's so some of that might be coming from outside rather than inside. I know that there's a one of the saints we peels in Magdalenas is in fluorescent green and orange. Well, probably not green, blue, because chipped in like orange or green. But he's the one who gave him the thread, and so they thought, cool. But it's kind of startling because it's this shocking 70s color palette, US shocking 70s color palette.
Is that the time period that it was?
Yeah.
Or do they use at all any of the natural colors, natural dyes?
They used to, Tenajapa still does, but mostly because that natural dyes fade.
Yeah.
The acrylic colors they don't. And so I think that was, and when I talked to somebody in Zinacantan at the time when there was this, that they were still doing the old style and then this, they could get these bright colors in acrylic thread and it was yay.
Yeah.
And the lady said, oh, but don't you like this? It's brighter and it's more colorful. And so, and I could be completely off the chart, but I do remember saying, well, I just don't know about this. And they, oh yeah, don't you really like this? So, and it won't fade. And you can wash it and smack it on rocks. So, all right, I think I'm gonna end this.